The gunshot echoed through the vast Colorado sky, drawing Grace Sullivan's eyes to the solitary crow that scattered from the juniper tree beside her husband's fresh grave. She clutched the folded American flag tighter to her chest, the fabric stiff and unyielding like the reality she now faced. April 1883 had arrived with a vengeance in Ouray, Colorado, and with it, a burden no 26-year-old widow should bear alone. Mrs. Sullivan, the banker's voice sliced through her grief like a cold knife. I understand this is difficult, but there are matters to discuss regarding your husband's loans. Grace turned to face Harold Whitcomb, his black suit immaculate despite the dusty cemetery path. Standing barely 5 feet tall in her worn boots, she still managed to look dignified as the last of the mourners departed down the hill toward town. "My husband is barely in the ground, Mr. Whitcomb," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Surely this can wait a day or two." "I'm afraid not, Mrs. Sullivan." Whitcomb extracted a folded document from his breast pocket. "Your husband borrowed heavily to expand the ranch. The payments are 3 months behind, and with his passing—" He cleared his throat. "The bank must protect its interests." Grace stared at the paper he extended toward her, the numbers swimming before her eyes. $5,000. The sum was astronomical. "That can't be right. Interest compounds, Mrs. Sullivan. I'll need payment or possession within 30 days. Her fingers tightened around the flag. "That ranch has been in my husband's family for 2 generations. Our whole life is there." "Was there," Whitcomb corrected, adjusting his spectacles. "Unless you can produce the money, which I highly doubt a woman in your position could manage." Grace straightened her back. "I'll find a way." "You have until May 5th. Good day, Mrs. Sullivan." With a curt nod, he turned and walked away, leaving her alone with her husband's grave and an impossible deadline. The April wind whipped at her black mourning dress as she stood motionless, the magnitude of her situation settling over her like the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. Thomas Sullivan had been a good man, hardworking and honest, but he'd never been forthcoming about their finances. Now she understood why. 3 hours later, Grace sat at her kitchen table surrounded by ledgers and notices, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. The ranch, 200 acres of tough but beautiful land nestled in the shadow of the San Juan Mountains, had been her home for the 5 years of her marriage. The thought of losing it to Whitcomb's bank felt like dying a second death. A knock at the door startled her. She wasn't expecting visitors, and most of the town had paid their respects at the funeral. Wiping her eyes, she crossed to the door, smoothing her skirts out of habit more than vanity. When she opened the door, the setting sun silhouetted a tall figure on her porch, a man whose face she couldn't make out against the glare. "Mrs. Sullivan." His voice was deep, with a subtle drawl that marked him as not being from Colorado. "Yes." She shielded her eyes, trying to make out his features. "Name's Tucker Quinn. I rode with your husband during the war." He removed his hat, revealing a face weathered by sun and time, yet handsome in its rugged way. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and his eyes, a startling shade of blue, watched her with a mixture of respect and hesitation. "I heard about Thomas. I'm mighty sorry for your loss." Grace stepped back, allowing him inside. "I don't recall Thomas mentioning a Tucker Quinn." The man stepped across the threshold, boots heavy on the wooden floor. He was tall, at least 6 feet, with broad shoulders that spoke of a life of physical labor. His clothes were trail-worn but clean denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest. The gun at his hip was secured in a well-used holster. "We weren't close friends, madam, more like acquaintances who watched each other's backs. I've been working cattle drives up in Montana these past years." He held his hat in his hands, turning it slowly. "I was passing through when I heard the news. Thought I should pay my respects. Grace gestured toward the kitchen. Would you like some coffee, Mr. Quinn? It's the least I can offer someone who served with Thomas. That would be kind, thank you. He followed her, his eyes taking in the modest but well-kept home. As Grace busied herself with the coffee, she felt his gaze fall on the papers scattered across the table. She quickly gathered them, but not before his eyes caught the bank's letterhead. Trouble with Whitcomb's Bank. He asked, his voice careful, not prying but concerned. Grace hesitated. She barely knew this man, yet there was something in his manner that inspired trust. Thomas had debts I wasn't aware of. The bank is calling them in now that he's gone. Tucker nodded thoughtfully. Banks don't waste much time, do they? Not even for a widow. 30 days to pay or they take the ranch. The words burned in her throat. $5,000. Tucker whistled low. That's a steep sum. Impossible is more like it. Grace placed a mug of coffee before him and sat down across the table. I have 20 head of cattle, some chickens, and a vegetable garden. Even if I sold it all, I wouldn't come close. Tucker sipped his coffee, watching her over the rim of his mug. Your husband was a good man, Mrs. Sullivan. A bit reckless sometimes, but decent to his core. He never mentioned the loans. Grace's voice cracked slightly. I don't understand why he'd hide something so important. Men do foolish things to protect the ones they love. Tucker set down his mug. Sometimes keeping troubles to themselves feels like shielding others from worry. Well, his shielding has left me in quite a predicament. She shook her head. I'm sorry, Mr. Quinn. You came to pay respects, not hear me complain. No apology needed, madam. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes thoughtful. What will you do? I don't know. I have no family left. The ranch is all I have. She squared her shoulders. But I won't give up without a fight. Tucker nodded, respect evident in his gaze. That's the spirit that tames these mountains, Mrs. Sullivan. As twilight deepened outside the windows, they talked more about Thomas, about the war years, and about the ranch. Tucker shared stories that painted a picture of her husband she hadn't known, younger, more carefree, but always speaking of the ranch and the wife waiting for him with pride. When Tucker finally stood to leave, the clock on the mantel showed it was past 9. I've kept you too long, he said, reaching for his hat. Thank you for the coffee and conversation. Where are you staying in town? Grace asked, walking him to the door. Haven't sorted that yet. Might camp outside town if the hotels are full. Nonsense. We have a spare room in the bunkhouse. It's the least I can offer someone who served with Thomas. Tucker seemed about to refuse, but then nodded. That's mighty kind. Just for tonight, then. I'll be moving on tomorrow. But Tucker Quinn didn't move on the next day. Instead, he woke at dawn and set about fixing a broken fence line he'd noticed on his arrival. By the time Grace emerged from the main house, coffee in hand, he had already repaired 20 feet of fencing. Mr. Quinn, you don't need to do that, she called, walking toward him across the yard. He straightened, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool morning air. Call me Tucker, please, and it's no trouble. That fence wouldn't have held a determined rabbit, let alone cattle. Grace handed him the coffee. Well, Tucker, I appreciate the help, but I can't pay you. I'm not asking for payment. He took a sip of coffee. Consider it a debt to Thomas. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Tucker would wake before sunrise, work on the most pressing repairs around the ranch, and be halfway through a day's labor before Grace could protest. She found herself watching him from the kitchen window as he mended, fixed, and strengthened the ranch bit by bit. His strength and capability were evident in every task he undertook. On the 4th morning, Grace intercepted him as he headed toward the barn. This can't continue, she said firmly. You're working from dawn till dusk on a ranch that will likely belong to the bank in a few weeks. Tucker paused, a slight smile playing at his lips. I've never been one to let a bank dictate my actions, Mrs. Sullivan. Grace, she corrected automatically, and you're avoiding my point. I'm not doing this for the bank, Grace. His voice softened. I'm doing it because it's right. Thomas would have done the same for me. Something in his tone made her pause. Did he do something for you, I mean? Tucker looked toward the mountains, his expression distant. He saved my life once. Bullet meant for me caught him in the shoulder instead. Never let me thank him properly. Grace's eyes widened. He never mentioned that. Like I said, he was a modest man. Tucker adjusted his hat. Now, about those cattle, they need proper branding if you're going to sell them at a fair price. Sell them, Grace frowned. I was thinking of driving them to market myself. Tucker's eyebrows shot up. That's rough country between here and any decent market, not to mention cattle rustlers. I can handle it, she said, though uncertainty crept into her voice. Tucker studied her face. I believe you could, but you shouldn't have to. Not alone, anyway. Are you offering to help drive my cattle to market, Mr. Quinn? Tucker, he reminded her. And yes, I am. Though 20 head won't fetch anywhere near what you need. It's a start. Grace squared her shoulders. And I appreciate the offer, but I can't ask you to delay your travels further. You're not asking, I'm offering. His blue eyes held hers steadily. Besides, I've got nowhere pressing to be. That afternoon, they rode the property together, assessing the cattle and planning the drive to the nearest market in Montrose. Grace was impressed by Tucker's knowledge and the respectful way he offered suggestions without assuming command. As they crested a hill overlooking the western part of the ranch, Tucker reined his horse to a stop. This is fine grazing land. Grace nodded, pride evident in her posture. Thomas chose well when he bought this section. The creek never runs dry, even in August. A man could build something lasting here, Tucker said softly, almost to himself. Then louder, what did Thomas plan to do with the loan money? $5,000 is a lot for property improvements. Grace sighed, the familiar pain of her husband's secrets washing over her. I wish I knew. The money's gone, but I can't see where it went. The ranch is in worse shape now than a year ago. Tucker frowned. That doesn't sound like the Thomas Sullivan I knew. He was careful with resources. People change, Grace said simply. Maybe the war changed him more than I realized. They rode in silence for a while, the April sun warm on their backs. As they approached the southern boundary, Grace pointed to a dilapidated structure barely visible among the trees. That old cabin belonged to the original homesteader. Thomas always talked about fixing it up someday. Tucker guided his horse toward it, curiosity evident in his expression. Mind if we take a closer look? The cabin was small but sturdily built, though years of neglect had taken their toll. The roof sagged in one corner, and the door hung askew on rusted hinges. Tucker dismounted and approached carefully, testing the porch boards with his boot before stepping fully onto them. Foundation still solid, he remarked, peering through a dirty window. Wouldn't take much to make it habitable again. Grace remained on her horse, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Despite his helpfulness, Tucker Quinn was still essentially a stranger who had appeared at her door with stories of her husband that she couldn't verify. What brought you to our anyway? She asked suddenly. You said you were passing through, but you've been rather vague about your destination. Tucker turned from the window, his expression unreadable. Fair question. He stepped off the porch and leaned against a post. Truth is, I've been drifting since the war ended. Cattle drives, ranch work, even some mining. Nothing stuck. And now I'm helping a friend's widow save her ranch. He smiled slightly. Seems like as good a purpose as any. Grace studied him, trying to reconcile his easy manner and helpful nature with her instinctive caution. You're a puzzle, Tucker Quinn. Not really, he replied, mounting his horse again. "Just a man trying to do right by an old debt." As they rode back toward the main house, Grace found herself warming to his company despite her reservations. There was something comforting about his presence, solid and dependable in a way that reminded her of the mountains themselves. The next morning, Grace woke to the sound of hammering. She dressed quickly and rushed outside to find Tucker repairing the porch steps that had been threatening to collapse for months. "You're at it again," she called, unable to keep the smile from her voice. He glanced up. Hammer paused mid-strike. "Morning, Grace. Hope the noise didn't wake you." "It did, but I needed to get up anyway." She approached, wrapping her shawl tighter against the early morning chill. "The steps look good. They'll be safer now." He drove one last nail home and stood, stretching his back. "I was thinking we should start the cattle drive day after tomorrow." "Weather looks favorable." Grace nodded, her mind already racing with preparations. "I'll need to pack provisions, and I'll need to finish the branding today." Tucker collected his tools. "With your permission, of course. You have it." She hesitated, then added, "Tucker, I don't know how to thank you for all this help." His smile was warm, genuine. "No thanks needed, but coffee wouldn't go amiss." She laughed, the sound surprising her. It had been weeks since she'd felt anything close to lightness. "Coffee it is, then." As they sat on the porch drinking coffee, the morning sun painting the mountains gold and rose, Grace found herself studying Tucker's profile. The strong line of his jaw, the slight crinkles at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled, the capable hands that held his mug with surprising gentleness. "Tell me more about yourself," she said suddenly. "Not just about the war, Thomas, but about you." Tucker looked surprised, then thoughtful. "Not much to tell, really. Born in Texas, raised by my mother after my father died in a mining accident. Joined up with the Union Army in '61, though most Texans went Confederate. That caused some friction back home." "Why the Union?" Grace asked, genuinely curious. Never could stomach the idea of owning people. His voice was matter of fact, simple as that. Grace nodded, respecting his straightforwardness. "And after the war, tried going home, but Texas had changed. Or maybe I had," he shrugged. "So I started moving. Wyoming, Montana, Utah. Worked wherever I could find honest labor." "No family of your own?" A shadow crossed his face. "Almost once. There was a woman in Cheyenne. Sarah was her name. We were to be married, but she took fever in the winter of '70, didn't make it to spring." "I'm sorry," Grace said softly, understanding all too well the ache of loss that lingered in his words. "It was a long time ago." Tucker set his empty mug down. "What about you? How did you meet Thomas?" Grace smiled at the memory. "I was teaching school in Denver. He came to drop off his niece, his sister's child, and knocked over the inkwell on my desk. He was so mortified he brought me flowers the next day to apologize. We were married 6 months later." "Sounds like Thomas," Tucker chuckled, "always rushing headlong into things." "Yes," Grace agreed, her smile fading slightly. "Perhaps that's how we ended up in this situation." Tucker stood, sensing her shift in mood. "Speaking of situations, I'd best get to those cattle. Day's not getting any younger." As he walked toward the corral, Grace watched him go, confusion swirling in her mind. Tucker Quinn had entered her life like an unexpected Chinook wind, warming and changing the landscape. His presence made the weight of her troubles seem less crushing, yet added a new complexity she hadn't anticipated, a growing awareness of him, not just as her husband's wartime acquaintance, but as a man in his own right. That evening, as they sat across from each other at the kitchen table sharing a simple supper of beans and cornbread, Grace broached the subject that had been nagging at her. "I've been thinking about what happens after the cattle drive," she began, pushing her plate aside. "Even if we get a good price, it won't be enough to save the ranch." Tucker nodded, his expression serious. I've been pondering that too. You've got options, though none of them easy. Such as, you could try negotiating with Whitcomb for more time. Or seek a loan elsewhere, though that's just trading one debt for another. He hesitated. Or you could consider selling part of the land to keep the rest. Grace shook her head firmly. The ranch stays together. Thomas would have wanted that. Then we need to find another way to raise that money. Tucker leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. What skills do you have beyond ranching? I was a teacher, as I mentioned. I can sew, cook, garden. She spread her hands. Nothing that brings in $5,000 in a few weeks. Tucker was silent for a long moment. There's always the possibility of a partner, someone to invest in the ranch, share the workload and profits. Grace's eyes narrowed. Are you suggesting I marry for money, Mr. Quinn? No, madam, he replied quickly, looking mildly horrified at the suggestion. I meant a business partner, nothing more. Oh, Grace felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. I misunderstood. My fault for not being clear. Tucker cleared his throat. But it's something to consider. This ranch is too much for one person to manage alone, regardless of the bank situation. Grace stood and began clearing the dishes, needing movement to disguise her discomfort. I'll think on it. The next day passed in a flurry of preparations for the cattle drive. Grace baked extra bread and packed jerky and beans, while Tucker checked and repaired tack and gave the cattle a final inspection. By sundown, everything was ready for an early departure the following morning. As they stood in the yard watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, Tucker turned to Grace. You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. I doubt I'll sleep much, she admitted. Too much on my mind. Tucker nodded, understanding. The drive will go smoothly. I've done this many times. It's not just the drive I'm worried about. Grace wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly vulnerable. It's everything. The bank, the ranch, the future. Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning in it all. You're stronger than you know, Grace Sullivan. Tucker's voice was soft but certain. I've seen how you handle this place, how you face each day despite your grief. That takes courage few possess. His words warmed something inside her that had been cold since Thomas's death. Thank you for saying that. Just speaking truth. Tucker shifted slightly, seeming almost uncomfortable with the moment's intimacy. Well, I should turn in. Dawn comes early. Tucker, Grace called as he turned to go. Why are you really helping me? And don't say it's because of Thomas. There's more to it than that. He stopped, his back to her for a long moment before he slowly turned around. The fading light cast shadows across his face, making his expression difficult to read. When I first heard about Thomas's death, I felt I should pay my respects and move on. That was the plan. He met her eyes directly. But then I met you, standing tall despite everything, fighting for this land with everything you have, and I couldn't just ride away. So it's pity. Grace's chin lifted slightly. No, the word was firm. It's admiration and maybe. He hesitated, then continued more carefully. Maybe it's a chance to be part of something worthwhile again, something honest and real. They stood in silence, the weight of his words hanging between them like the gathering twilight. Finally, Grace nodded, accepting his answer without further questioning. Good night, Tucker. Good night, Grace. The cattle drive to Montrose took 4 days. Grace insisted on accompanying Tucker despite his initial protests, proving herself capable in the saddle and with the herd. They faced a spring rainstorm, a skittish herd spooked by thunder, and a tense encounter with 3 rough-looking men who watched their progress a little too closely but ultimately kept their distance. Through it all, Tucker's respect for Grace deepened. She never complained, even when soaked to the skin by rain or exhausted from long hours in the saddle. Her determination was as immovable as the mountains that watched over their journey. For Grace, the drive was a revelation of Tucker's character. His patience with the cattle, his quiet competence in every situation, and his respectful treatment of her never coddling, never undermining confirmed her growing trust in him. Around the campfire each night, their conversations ranged from practical ranch matters to more personal reflections, building a friendship that felt increasingly natural. In Montrose, they managed to sell the cattle for a fair price, $800, more than Grace had expected but far short of what she needed. As they sat in the hotel restaurant celebrating their small success, the reality of her situation weighed heavily on her again. $800, she said, staring into her coffee cup. Only $4,200 to go. Tucker watched her from across the table. It's a start, Grace. A drop in the bucket. She sighed, then straightened her shoulders. But you're right, it's something. They returned to Ouray the next day, the journey quieter without the cattle to manage. As they crested the final ridge and the Sullivan ranch came into view, Grace reined her horse to a stop. Look, she said, pointing toward the main house. Someone's there. Tucker squinted against the afternoon sun. Wagon by the porch. Looks like Whitcomb's. Grace's expression hardened. What's he doing on my property? They rode down quickly, tension evident in both their postures. As they approached, Harold Whitcomb emerged from the house, his face registering surprise at their arrival. Mrs. Sullivan, he called, adjusting his spectacles. I was beginning to think you'd abandoned the property. Grace dismounted, her movements stiff with anger. This is still my ranch for another 2 weeks, Mr. Whitcomb. You have no right to enter my home uninvited. I was merely assessing the property. Whitcomb's tone was dismissive. The bank needs a complete inventory before taking possession. Tucker stepped forward, his presence suddenly imposing. Seems premature, considering Mrs. Sullivan still has time to settle the debt. Whitcomb's eyes narrowed as he took in Tucker's trail-worn appearance. And you are, Tucker Quinn, friend of the family. Well, Mr. Quinn, this is a private matter between Mrs. Sullivan and First Bank of Ouray. Whitcomb turned back to Grace. I assume your absence means you've been unsuccessful in raising the funds. Grace reached into her pocket and withdrew the money from the cattle sale. $800, a partial payment. Whitcomb looked at the money with undisguised disdain. Hardly worth counting, Mrs. Sullivan. The full amount is due in 16 days. I'm aware of the deadline, Grace replied, her voice steady despite the fury in her eyes. Then you're also aware that partial payments aren't accepted. It's all or nothing. Whitcomb stepped off the porch. I'll take my leave now, but expect me on May 5th, either with the full payment or to take possession. As he climbed into his wagon, Tucker moved closer to Grace. That man needs a lesson in manners. What he needs doesn't matter. Grace watched the wagon roll away. What matters is that he holds all the cards. Tucker's jaw tightened. Not all of them. Not yet. That evening, after a quiet supper, Tucker excused himself to check on the horses. Grace remained at the table, reviewing their situation for what felt like the 100th time. No matter how she approached the problem, the solution remained elusive. $800 was all they had, and no reasonable opportunity to earn more in the short time remaining. When Tucker returned, his expression was resolute. I have a proposition for you, Grace. She looked up, weary but attentive. I'm listening. I want to be your partner in this ranch. He sat across from her, his manner direct. I have money saved, $4,500. Combined with what we got for the cattle, it's enough to pay off Whitcomb and have some left over for improvements. Grace stared at him, stunned. You have that kind of money? Been saving for years. Was hoping to buy land of my own someday. His eyes held her steadily. This would be a business arrangement. The ranch would be half yours, half mine. We'd work it together, share the profits. Why would you do this? Grace asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tucker leaned forward, elbows on the table. Because I believe in this place. And because I believe in you, Grace Sullivan. I've seen how you care for this land, how you work it. That's the kind of partner I'd want. Grace stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Her mind raced with implications, possibilities, and concerns. It's too much, Tucker. I can't let you risk your life savings on this ranch. It's my risk to take. He remained seated, giving her space. And I don't consider it much of a risk. This land is good. With hard work and good management, it can be profitable. And if it fails, if drought comes or cattle prices drop or 100 other things go wrong, then we face it together. His voice was calm, certain. Better than facing Whitcomb alone. Grace turned to look at him, really look at him. In the lamplight, his features were strong, reliable. His eyes, those startling blue eyes, watched her with patience and something else, something she wasn't ready to name. I need time to think, she finally said. Tucker nodded. Of course, it's a big decision. He stood, reaching for his hat. I'll head out to the bunkhouse. You know where to find me when you decide. After he left, Grace sat by the dying fire, turning his offer over in her mind. It was generous, incredibly so, and practical in a way she couldn't deny. With Tucker's money and labor, the ranch could not only survive but thrive. Yet something about it troubled her, a nagging feeling she couldn't quite identify. Was it pride? The thought of accepting such help, of sharing what had been Thomas's legacy? Or was it something more personal, the confusion of emotions Tucker Quinn stirred in her, feelings that seemed disloyal to her husband's memory? Grace slept fitfully that night, dreams blending with worries until she woke at dawn, no closer to a decision. She dressed and walked out onto the porch, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold. The beauty of the land, her land, struck her anew. The thought of losing it was physical pain. Movement caught her eye. Tucker, already at work in the corral, repairing a section of fence that had been neglected too long. His movements were efficient, practiced, a man who knew manual labor and respected it. A man who had offered his life savings to help her keep her home. In that moment, watching him work in the soft morning light, something shifted in Grace's heart. This wasn't about charity or pride. It was about partnership, about finding strength together that neither possessed alone. And perhaps, in time, it could become something more. She walked toward the corral, decision made. Tucker saw her approaching and straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans. Morning, he called, his expression carefully neutral. I've been thinking about your offer, Grace said without preamble. Tucker waited, giving her time to continue. I accept, with one condition. She met his eyes directly. If either of us decides to leave the partnership, we sell the ranch and split the proceeds fairly. I won't have you feeling trapped here out of obligation. Tucker's face broke into a smile that transformed his features, making him look younger, almost boyish. That's fair, and Grace, I won't feel trapped. This is my choice, freely made. Then we have a deal. She extended her hand businesslike. Tucker took it, his grip warm and firm. Partners. 3 days later, they rode into town together to meet with Whitcomb. The banker's face registered shock when Grace laid $5,000 on his desk. Where did you get this money, Mrs. Sullivan? He demanded, suspicion evident in his tone. That's not your concern, Grace replied calmly. The debt is paid in full, with several days to spare. Whitcomb's gaze shifted to Tucker, who stood beside Grace with quiet confidence. I see. And what is your role in this, Mr. Quinn? I'm Mrs. Sullivan's business partner now. Tucker's tone left no room for further questioning. We'll need a receipt and confirmation that the loan is satisfied. Whitcomb's mouth thinned with displeasure, but he complied, writing out the documentation with meticulous precision. The bank had plans for that property, he said as he handed over the papers. Prime location for development. The bank will have to find another property to develop, Grace replied, taking the receipt. The Sullivan Ranch isn't for sale. As they left the bank, a weight lifted from Grace's shoulders that had been there since Thomas's funeral. The ranch was secure, at least for now. She and Tucker walked down Aueray's Main Street, their steps lighter. First thing we should do is repair that south pasture fence, Tucker said, already planning improvements. Then maybe look at breeding better stock come fall. Grace smiled, touched by his enthusiasm. One thing at a time, partner. Let's celebrate this victory first. They stopped at the general store to purchase supplies, their conversation flowing easily as they discussed future plans. The storekeeper, Mrs. Jenkins, watched them with undisguised curiosity. I heard about your arrangement, she said as she totaled their purchases. Quite unconventional, a widow and a bachelor running a ranch together. Grace felt her cheeks warm. It's a business partnership, Mrs. Jenkins, nothing more. Of course, dear. The older woman's knowing smile suggested she didn't believe that for a moment. 5 pounds of coffee, that'll be 75 cents. As they loaded their purchases into the wagon, Tucker glanced at Grace. People will talk. People always talk. Grace adjusted her bonnet against the midday sun. It doesn't matter what they think, doesn't it? Tucker's question was gentle. Your reputation is less important than keeping my home, she finished firmly. Besides, we know the truth of our arrangement. They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence, each lost in thought. The reality of their partnership was just beginning to take shape, with all its practical considerations and undefined boundaries. How would they divide the labor, make decisions about the ranch, navigate the daily intimacy of working and living in close proximity? As May turned to June, these questions found their answers naturally. Tucker moved from the bunkhouse to the refurbished cabin they'd discovered on their ride, giving them both privacy while keeping him close enough for ranch work. They fell into a rhythm, with Grace managing the household, garden, and accounts, while Tucker handled most of the heavy labor, though Grace insisted on sharing many of the outdoor tasks as well. The ranch began to flourish under their combined efforts. Fences were mended, the barn roof repaired, and plans made for expanding the herd come autumn. They planted additional crops, installed a new pump for the well, and even found time to improve the main house with fresh paint and new curtains Grace sewed from fabric purchased in town. Through it all, their partnership deepened into friendship. They shared meals most evenings, talking long into the night about their pasts, their hopes, the daily triumphs and challenges of ranch life. Tucker proved to be not just hardworking but thoughtful, with a quiet wisdom that complemented Grace's more practical nature. She, in turn, brought warmth and purpose to his solitary existence, giving him roots he hadn't realized he craved. One evening in late June, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk, Grace broached a subject that had been nagging at her. I found something strange yesterday while organizing Thomas's old papers, she began hesitantly. Tucker set down the coffee mug he'd been nursing. What kind of strange? A deed to a silver claim up in the mountains north of here, dated last year. She frowned, perplexed. I think this is where the loan money went, Tucker. Thomas was mining. Tucker's expression grew serious. That would explain a lot. Silver fever's gotten many a man in trouble around these parts. But why keep it secret from me? The hurt in her voice was evident. We shared everything, or so I thought. Maybe he wanted to surprise you with a big strike. Tucker's suggestion was gentle. Or maybe he was ashamed of taking such a risk with your future. Grace sighed, leaning back in her chair. We'll never know now. We could look into it, Tucker offered. Find the claim, see if there's anything to it. Would you? Hope flickered briefly in her eyes. I've been wondering if it might be worth something, even if just to sell. I'll ride up there tomorrow, take a look. Tucker studied her face in the fading light. But don't pin too many hopes on it, Grace. Most claims pan out to nothing. The next day, Tucker rode into the mountains, following the coordinates on Thomas's claim. The journey took most of the day, the terrain growing steeper and more challenging as he ascended. By late afternoon, he located the site, a small, partially dug mine entrance with abandoned tools scattered nearby. Tucker spent several hours exploring the claim, examining the rock face and testing samples. When he finally returned to the ranch after nightfall, Grace was waiting anxiously on the porch. Well, she called as he dismounted, her voice betraying her excitement. Tucker removed his hat, his expression somber. The claim's there, right enough. But Grace, there's no silver. Not that I could see anyway. Her face fell. You're sure? I've done enough mining to recognize promising ore. This isn't it. He climbed the porch steps wearily. I'm sorry, Grace. Looks like Thomas fell for fool's silver quartz with a bit of shine to it. Grace nodded slowly, accepting his assessment. That explains the loans, then. He was pouring money into a dream. A dream for both of you, Tucker reminded her gently. He wanted to make you wealthy, give you security. Instead, he nearly cost me everything. There was no bitterness in her tone, only sad resignation. Oh, Thomas, always reaching for the stars without checking if the ladder was sound. They stood together in the soft summer night, the silence between them comfortable despite the disappointment. Finally, Tucker spoke again. The claim is still yours. We could sell it to some hopeful prospector, not for much, but something. Grace shook her head. No, I won't pass Thomas's mistake to someone else. Let it stay unclaimed after the registration expires. Tucker nodded, respecting her decision. You're a woman of principle, Grace Sullivan. As are you, Tucker Quinn. She smiled faintly. Would you like some supper? I've kept it warm. July brought scorching heat and the challenge of keeping cattle watered in the dry conditions. Tucker and Grace worked from dawn until dusk, moving the herd to fresh pastures, maintaining the precious water sources and continuing improvements to the ranch. Despite the physical demands, these were good days. Their partnership functioned smoothly, each learning to anticipate the other's needs and preferences. They discovered shared interests in books and music, with Tucker revealing a surprisingly good singing voice and Grace admitting to a secret passion for dime novels. The townspeople gradually accepted their unusual arrangement, though speculation continued about the true nature of their relationship. Mrs. Jenkins in particular watched them with knowing eyes whenever they came to town for supplies, often adding little extras to their orders, a bag of peppermint candies, a length of pretty ribbon with a wink to Grace. One Saturday, in mid-July, they traveled to town for the annual summer festival. The main street was decorated with bunting, a band played in the square, and tables of food and drink lined the boardwalks. For Grace, it was the first real celebration since Thomas's death, and she found herself enjoying the music, the conversation with neighbors, and especially Tucker's company as they strolled among the festivities. Mrs. Sullivan, Mr. Quinn. Harold Whitcomb's voice cut through their enjoyment like a cold wind. Enjoying the festivities, they turned to find the banker watching them, his wife on his arm and a false smile on his thin lips. "Good afternoon, Mr. Whitcomb," Grace replied politely. "Yes, it's a lovely celebration." "Indeed." His gaze moved between them, calculating. "Your arrangement seems to be working well. The ranch looks improved. We're making progress, Tucker said, his tone neutral but his stance protective beside Grace. How fortunate for you, Mrs. Sullivan, to find such a generous partner so quickly after your bereavement. Whitcomb's insinuation was thinly veiled. Grace felt Tucker tense beside her, but before he could respond, she laid a hand gently on his arm. Yes, I am fortunate, Mr. Whitcomb. God provides in unexpected ways. Mrs. Whitcomb tugged at her husband's sleeve. Harold, the mayor is waiting to speak with you. With a curt nod, Whitcomb allowed himself to be led away, but not before casting a final appraising look at Grace and Tucker. That man still wants your land, Tucker observed quietly once they were alone again. Our land, Grace corrected him. And yes, I believe he does, but he can't have it. Tucker's eyes softened at her words. Our land, he repeated as if testing how it sounded. I like that. The festival continued into the evening with lanterns lit and a space cleared for dancing. When the band struck up a waltz, Tucker turned to Grace with unexpected shyness. Would you care to dance, Mrs. Sullivan? The formality of his address, used now only in public, made her smile. I would, Mr. Quinn. He led her into the circle of dancers, one hand resting lightly at her waist, the other holding hers with careful respect. Grace had not danced since Thomas's death, had not felt the simple joy of moving to music with a partner. As Tucker guided her through the steps, his movements surprisingly graceful for such a tall man, she felt something long dormant stirring within her, a warmth, a lightness, a kind of awakening. Their eyes met and held as they turned about the square, oblivious to the curious glances and whispered comments of the townspeople. In that moment, the pretense of mere business partners seemed to fall away, revealing something deeper taking root between them. When the music ended, Tucker didn't immediately release her. They stood still among the dispersing dancers, something unspoken passing between them. We should head back, Grace finally said, her voice soft. It's getting late. Tucker nodded, reluctantly stepping back. Of course. The ride home was quiet, each lost in private thoughts. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet, the air sweet with the scent of summer grasses. When they reached the ranch, Tucker helped Grace down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Thank you for the dance, she said, suddenly shy in a way she hadn't been with him before. The pleasure was mine. His voice was deep in the darkness. Good night, Grace. Good night, Tucker. As July turned to August, subtle changes appeared in their interactions, a newfound awareness, a careful consideration of physical space, moments of charged silence. They continued their work as before, but something had shifted, like the imperceptible turning of seasons that happens before the leaves begin to change. One afternoon, as they worked together repairing the chicken coop, Grace found herself watching Tucker's hands, strong, capable hands that built and fixed and occasionally, when he thought no one was looking, gently stroked the farm kit that had adopted him. Hands that had held hers with such care during their dance. You're staring, Tucker observed, glancing up from his work with a questioning smile. Grace blushed, caught in her contemplation. I was just thinking how different you are from Thomas. Tucker set down his hammer, giving her his full attention. Different how? He was always in a rush, always focused on the next big thing. She leaned against the coop, thoughtful. You take your time. You see what's in front of you and give it proper attention. Is that good or bad? His tone was light, but his eyes were serious. It's good, Grace replied softly. Very good. A moment of understanding passed between them, delicate and unspoken. Then Tucker cleared his throat and returned to his work, though a smile played at the corners of his mouth for the rest of the afternoon. That evening, a summer storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing much-needed rain but also fierce lightning and powerful winds. Grace stood at the window watching the display of nature's power, grateful for the moisture but concerned about the livestock and structures. A particularly loud crack of thunder made her jump, and in the flash of lightning that followed, she saw Tucker running from his cabin toward the barn, clearly worried about the horses. Without hesitation, she grabbed her shawl and hurried outside, rain immediately soaking her dress as she dashed across the yard. Inside the barn, Tucker was calming the nervous horses, speaking to them in low, soothing tones. He looked up in surprise as Grace appeared, dripping in the doorway. "Grace, you shouldn't be out in this." He moved toward her, concern evident in his expression. "I saw you heading to the barn, thought you might need help." She pushed wet hair from her face, suddenly aware of how impulsive her action had been. Tucker's face softened. "The horses were spooked by the thunder. They're settling now." He reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're soaked through." "So are you," she observed, noticing how his shirt clung to his broad shoulders, how raindrops glistened in his dark hair. Another crack of thunder shook the barn, closer this time. The horses nickered nervously, and Tucker moved to check on them again. Grace followed, helping to distribute fresh hay and speaking gentle reassurances to the animals. As they worked side by side in the lantern light, the storm raging outside, Grace felt a strange peace settle over her. This moment, this simple act of tending animals together while rain drummed on the roof, felt profoundly right, as if they'd been doing this together for years rather than months. When the horses were calm again, they sat on hay bales near the door, watching the rain and lightning through the partially open barn door. "Mighty storm," Tucker commented, stretching his long legs out before him. "Good for the land, though." "Yes," Grace agreed, then hesitated before continuing. "Tucker, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." He turned to her, expression open. "Ask away." "That money you used to help pay off the loan, was it really your life savings? All of it?" Tucker's gaze returned to the rain outside. "Most of it, not quite all." "Why would you risk so much on this ranch? On me?" The question had bothered her for weeks, never quite finding the right moment until now. Tucker was silent for so long Grace thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost lost beneath the sound of the rain. "After Sarah died, I lost my direction. Just drifted, taking whatever work came along, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots." He looked at his hands, work roughened and strong. "When I came here, saw this place, met you, something changed. I saw a purpose again. Something worth investing in, worth building." "The ranch," Grace said softly. Tucker turned to her then, his blue eyes intense in the lantern light. "Not just the ranch, Grace." The air between them seemed to still, the storm forgotten as they gazed at each other. Grace felt her heart quicken, understanding dawning like sunrise. "Tucker," she whispered, uncertainty and longing mingled in her voice. He leaned toward her slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, his lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it was barely there a question, not a demand. Grace answered by moving closer, her hand finding his shoulder as the kiss deepened into something more certain. When they parted, Tucker's expression was a mixture of wonder and concern. "I shouldn't have done that. It's too soon, and you're still—" Grace pressed her fingers to his lips, stopping his words. "It's been 4 months since Thomas died, but in some ways I lost him long before that to his dreams, his schemes, his secrets." She took a deep breath. "What I feel for you isn't disloyal to his memory. It's separate, different." "What do you feel?" Tucker asked, his voice rough with emotion. Grace smiled, the truth simple now that she'd acknowledged it. "I feel like I've found a partner in every sense of the word. Someone who sees me, respects me, works alongside me instead of around me." She touched his cheek gently. "I feel like I'm falling in love with you, Tucker Quinn." His eyes widened, then crinkled at the corners as a smile spread across his face. "Well now, that's fortunate." "Because I'm already head over heels in love with you, Grace Sullivan." The storm raged on outside, but within the barn, a different kind of lightning had struck, the kind that changes landscapes forever, illuminating paths previously unseen. September brought cooler temperatures, golden light, and the first hints of autumn color to the high country around our Ray. It also brought changes to the Sullivan Ranch, now increasingly referred to by townspeople as the Sullivan Quinn place. Tucker moved from the cabin to the main house, taking the spare bedroom that had once been intended for children Thomas and Grace never had. Their relationship progressed with the measured pace that characterized Tucker's approach to everything important: thoughtful, intentional, building something meant to last. They worked as before, partners in the daily labor of ranch life, but now with a new sweetness between them: shared smiles across the breakfast table, a touch of hands when passing tools, occasional kisses stolen between chores. In the evenings, they often sat together on the porch swing Tucker had built, talking about the future they were beginning to envision together. "I've been thinking," Tucker said one such evening, his arm around Grace's shoulders as they watched the sunset paint the mountains. "The south pasture would support another 15 head of cattle easily. With the money we've set aside, we could buy some good breeding stock this winter." "Always planning," Grace teased, leaning into his side. "What happened to the drifter who never stayed in one place too long?" "He found something worth staying for." Tucker's voice was warm against her hair. "Several somethings, in fact." Grace smiled, contentment filling her like the golden light that bathed the land around them. "I've been thinking, too, about us." Tucker shifted slightly to see her face. "What about us? People talk, about our arrangement." She met his eyes directly. "Mrs. Jenkins asked me yesterday, quite bluntly, when we're going to make it official." "Did she now?" Tucker's expression was amused. "And what did you tell her? That it was none of her business?" Grace's smile turned mischievous. "But I've been wondering the same thing myself." Tucker's arm tightened around her. "Grace Sullivan, are you proposing to me?" "Maybe I am." She sat up straighter, suddenly serious. "We're partners in everything else. Why not this too?" Tucker's expression softened into tenderness. "Because this deserves its own moment." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. "I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right time." Grace's breath caught as he opened his palm to reveal a simple gold ring with a small sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. "Tucker, it was my mother's," he explained, holding it between them. "She always said it should go to the woman who captured my heart for good." He took her hand gently. "I love you, Grace. Not just for your strength or your determination or your beauty, though all those things amaze me daily. I love the person you are, the way you face life head-on, the way you've let me into your world and made it ours." Tears filled Grace's eyes as he continued. "I don't have fancy words or grand gestures. What I have is a promise to walk beside you every day, to build this life together, to love you through whatever comes our way." He met her gaze steadily. "Will you marry me, Grace Sullivan?" "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you, Tucker Quinn." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, the last light of day caught the sapphire, making it glow like a captured piece of sky. Tucker drew her close, sealing their promise with a kiss that spoke of home and belonging and a future written together. They were married on a crisp October morning, with the aspen trees glowing gold against the deep blue Colorado sky. The ceremony was small but joyful, held on their own land with Reverend Mitchell officiating, and only a few close friends in attendance. Grace wore a new dress of deep blue that matched her eyes and carried wildflowers gathered from the meadow where Tucker had first kissed her. Tucker wore a new suit, looking both uncomfortable in the formal attire and impossibly handsome. Their vows were simple, heartfelt promises exchanged beneath an arch Tucker had constructed from ranch timber. When Reverend Mitchell pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in cheers and well wishes. Even Mrs. Jenkins dabbed at her eyes, her romantic heart thoroughly satisfied by the culmination of what she'd predicted from the first time she'd seen them together. Harold Whitcomb and his wife were notably absent from the celebration, though they'd been invited in a spirit of community reconciliation. The banker's interest in the Sullivan Quinn ranch had not diminished, but with the property now securely in the hands of the newlyweds, his schemes for acquisition had been temporarily thwarted. The reception was held in the yard, with tables set beneath the trees and lanterns ready for when dusk fell. Food was plentiful. Neighbors had contributed dishes, and Grace had baked for days beforehand. Music came from a local fiddler and his son on the banjo, filling the afternoon with lively tunes that soon had everyone dancing. As Tucker led Grace in their first dance as husband and wife, he leaned close to whisper in her ear, "Happy, Mrs. Quinn." Grace looked up at him, her eyes bright with joy. "Completely, Mr. Quinn, and you, more than I ever thought possible." His smile was tender as he twirled her beneath the October sky, and we're just getting started. As winter approached, they settled into married life with the same partnership that had characterized their business relationship, but now enriched with deeper intimacy and shared dreams. The ranch flourished under their combined care, with plans taking shape for expansion in the spring. December brought heavy snow that blanketed the ranch in pristine white, creating cozy evenings by the fire as they planned for the coming year. On Christmas morning, Grace presented Tucker with a hand-knitted scarf and a pocket watch she'd saved for months to purchase. Tucker gave her a silver locket containing a small photograph of them together, taken on their wedding day, but his real gift came later as they sat before the fire after dinner. "I have something else for you," he said, reaching behind the sofa to retrieve a wrapped package. Grace unwrapped it carefully to find a beautifully crafted wooden cradle, small enough for a newborn but sturdy enough to last for generations. Her eyes widened as she ran her fingers over the smooth wood, noting the intricate carvings of leaves and flowers along the sides. "Tucker, it's beautiful," she whispered, meeting his gaze with question in her eyes. He smiled, reaching for her hand. "I thought we might need it. Someday soon, perhaps." Grace's face bloomed with understanding and joy. "I think you might be right about that." She placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Sooner than you think, actually." Tucker's expression transformed from confusion to wonder in an instant. "Grace, are you saying?" "Dr. Hoffman confirmed it yesterday." Happy tears filled her eyes. "We're going to have a baby, Tucker." In June. Tucker gathered her into his arms, his joy too great for words. As they held each other before the crackling fire, snow falling gently outside the windows, Grace reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the depths of grief and the threat of losing everything, she had found not just security but a love deeper than she'd known possible. The bank that had nearly taken her land had inadvertently led her to Tucker, to partnership, to family. As if reading her thoughts, Tucker pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "You know, I never thanked Harold Whitcomb," Grace laughed softly, "for trying to take our ranch, for bringing us together." Tucker's hand rested gently over their growing child. "His greed led me to you." Sometimes blessings come from the strangest places. "Speaking of blessings," Grace said, "we should think about names for this little one." Tucker considered this seriously. If it's a boy, what about Thomas? To honor his memory, Grace's heart swelled at the gesture. Thomas Tucker Quinn. I like that. She leaned her head against his shoulder. And if it's a girl, perhaps Sarah, after someone who was important to you. Tucker's arms tightened around her, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah Grace Quinn. It's perfect. As the fire burned low and snow continued to fall outside, they talked of names and nursery colors, of first steps and bedtime stories, of the future taking shape within their home and within Grace's body. The ranch that had nearly been lost was now the foundation for generations to come, a legacy of love born from adversity, of partnership stronger than any challenge. The baby arrived on a warm June morning in 1884, a healthy boy with Tucker's blue eyes and a shock of dark hair. Thomas Tucker Quinn entered the world with a robust cry that made the midwife laugh and his parents weep with joy. As Grace held their son for the first time, Tucker beside her with wonder written across his face, she remembered the dark day of her first husband's funeral, when Harold Whitcomb had delivered his ultimatum. How impossible it had seemed then to save the ranch, how bleak her future had appeared. "What are you thinking?" Tucker asked, gently stroking their son's tiny hand with one finger. Grace smiled, exhausted but radiantly happy. "I'm thinking about journeys, how sometimes the hardest ones lead to the most beautiful destinations." Tucker leaned down to kiss her forehead, then their son's. "This is just the beginning of our journey, Grace. The best is yet to come." And as little Thomas wrapped his tiny fingers around his father's thumb, as the summer breeze carried the scent of wildflowers through the open window, as the sound of cattle drifted from the pastures of their thriving ranch, Grace knew with absolute certainty that Tucker was right. Their story, born from loss and debt, built on partnership, and love, was still being written, with chapters of joy stretching out before them like the vast Colorado sky. The bank had tried to take her land after her husband died, until the cowboy paid her debt in full. But what Tucker Quinn had given Grace went far beyond money. He had given her a partner, a love, a family, a future, priceless gifts that no bank could ever claim, no debt could ever diminish, and no hardship could ever take away.